Hello everyone, welcome back. So we have another very rich afternoon awaiting us. I hope you still have some energy left in you. We have 2 sessions now, then we'll have homage to Simone Weil, and then we have the finale. So, business are just collection of people, but yet we do refer to business as being either human or inhuman. To lead this very interesting conversation, I have the great pleasure I will have the great pleasure in a minute to invite Star Joan to join me with her panel. Star Joan is a well-known television personality, lawyer, and diversity advocate. She's also, along with Anne Marchand and Leah Daughtry, a key supporter of the Women's Forum program, for which I thank you. So, let me welcome Star Jones, who will, along with her panel, help us understand what gives business interaction a human touch. Please welcome Star and her panelists.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Please pardon our backs, those of you who are to our rear. We love you just the same. Wonderful. So that's a very good idea. Of course, I take my lead from my labor secretary, Madam Secretary. She did a little twirl. So if all the panelists can just turn around and at least say hello and acknowledge everybody in the room. Fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. I am truly humbled to be back here at the Women's Forum Global Meeting 2017. I'm honored to sit here with this phenomenal group of women. I make my living talking and representing women every single day, and to sit with women who have accomplished as much as these women really and truly is an honor, especially to talk about humanity in business. Businesses that were created literally from scratch 40 years ago are still thriving today, and they didn't gain their success from funny Instagram posts or Facebook messages or Twitter or any of the new technology. 40 years ago, we didn't even have the use of innovative technology. Successful businesses were then built on a quality of product and reputation, as well as human capital. So the question of humanity starts with, have we changed? Are we as a society and business leaders still operating based on organic relationships and an appreciation of people? Or has that robust technology and those advances, global freelancers and independent contractors scrutinizing the bottom line and love for profit changed how we do business? Are we less human? That is the heart of this panel discussion. How can businesses be more human? Joining me today is an extremely illustrious panel. Let me start, please. To my far left, Ann Richards. Ann Richards is the CEO of M&G Investments and is also on the board of leaders of 2020 Women on Boards, a U.S. organization which aims to increase the proportion of women on corporate boards. To my immediate left is Sue Stevenson, the Vice Chair of the Executive Committee for Impact 2030, and she is actually one of the co-founders of Impact 2030. To my far right is Alexis Herman, the Chair and Chief Executive Officer of New Ventures, LLC. She was also the first African-American woman to serve as an assistant to the President of the United States and the first African-American to ever lead the United States Department of Labor. And Diane D. St. Victor, General Counsel of ABB, is to my immediate right. She's been a member of ABB's Executive Committee since 2007 as General Counsel and Company Secretary, and has just completed her service on the board of Barclays PLC. Please welcome the panel today. Ladies, we all come from different backgrounds, and this will make for a certainly interesting discussion. My first question centers on the same theme for all of you, being more human. And let's start with you. Excellent customer service, thoughtful community service, positive work cultures, and a love for people. These are the principles of any good business, everybody would agree. But that was then. How can businesses today reconnect with their human capital and retrench financial capital to be more human?
So that's a question that's going to take more than half an hour. We know that. But trying to think about what we do as businesses, I think the first thing we have to think about is actually our relationship with broader society. We don't exist separately to society. We exist as part of society. We are a huge influencer on society. And so a starting point for me is thinking about what is it? What is our role in society? And has that changed? So don't think about the individual company model. Think about the broader impact that capitalism has, because fundamentally in the business world, you were talking about capitalistic world. And when you think about capitalism, when it works well, it's about creating jobs, creating good quality jobs. It is about innovation. It is about solving problems. We did a great fintech session earlier today, which is all about problem solving. And by virtue of the positive cycle that develops from that, when it works well, you see lives improve, both through the quality of what we're given, what we're offering, and the quality of the people that we're employing. And when it doesn't work, bad stuff happens. Bad stuff. Like, for example, people becoming less certain about their value to the business, therefore less certain about their place in society, therefore more anxious about their future. And as employers, we have to think about what is it that we do to assuage that. Now, if you look at what has changed over the last 20, 30 years, I think companies have increasingly looked at their human capital simply as a unit cost of manufacturing. They're just a unit of production in the same way as there are lots of other things that are. And is it a surprise, therefore, that in that environment that people feel disconnected, particularly from big business? So we've given, you see it reflected politically in the opinion polls. So there is something that we need to do as businesses about reconnecting with the virtual circle, which is to think about our human capital as something that is a long-term investment. So we're not just employing them to do a job today, a role today, and the moment that that ceases to be necessary or required, they are surplus to requirement because we will replace them with a different unit cost. And it might be technology or it might be a different person doing a different job. So we have to think about what that connectivity is around about that. So that is something, first and foremost, we have to have up there. I think the second thing, which relates to that in a way, is I think the gig economy, as we talk about it, is a red herring. Because too often, it's not actually about people working in certain ways because they want the flexibility, because they're feeling empowered. Actually, they're put in that position because employers have found it's a cheaper way to get the service that they need. And we need to be really careful about that. So I think we need to think broadly in societies what the right returns are to human capital as well as financial capital, and then thinking what we can do in a business to tap into those fears that we're seeing expressed to us by broader society. So now I know there's some specific things we'll come back into, but at a high level, I think that's what we need to think about as business leaders.
Human capital. Okay, Sue, globally, some say there is a really fundamental error in the way we do business. Social impact, purpose-driven missions, and climate change are always hot topics. Do they mean something to us? And what role can businesses play in taking better care of our planet and its people, remembering our humanity?
Thank you, Star. So yes, I mean, I think the private sector is often blamed for many of the ills on the planet, and as we think about the challenges that the planet faces with hunger and poverty and inequality, both financial and gender inequality and climate change, there are indeed many issues, but I do believe that the private sector can play an extraordinary role through human capital in making a positive impact. And we've had some extraordinary examples over the past 2 days of businesses that really have very embedded strategies around social impact and sustainability. So I'm going to speak maybe to those in the audience who are maybe at maybe just starting a company or in a junior role in the company. And I would say it's very important within a business that you embed your social impact strategies and sustainability right into the business of the organization. If it's bolted on the side, if it's something that's put to the side because it's the nice thing to do or the right thing to do, it doesn't get properly resourced, it doesn't get integrated appropriately, your employees won't be fully vested, and you won't get the brand benefits of having a really authentic, transparent program in place. So the organization that I'm with, Impact 2030, is focused on human capital through employee volunteering to impact the Sustainable Development Goals. For those of you that might not be aware of the Sustainable Development Goals, they were adopted by all 193 member countries of the United Nations in 2015. They have a 15-year life, and the 17 goals and 169 targets focus on the planet's most critical issues: hunger, poverty, gender, climate. For those of you that are not familiar with them, I would just encourage you to go to put in the search engine Sustainable Development Goals, or Global Goals as they're referred to. Countries are now reporting back on the goals on an annual basis. And increasingly, we're seeing increased awareness of these goals. And I really believe it is critical that the private sector plays a role in advancing the achievement of these goals. I had the honor of being at the SDG Forum at the United Nations about 2 months ago. Last year, which is the first year anniversary of the global goals, there were about 200 businesses from around the world represented. This year in July, there were 1,200. In fact, they had to move the event to the hallowed halls of the General Assembly, and to have the private sector sitting in the United Nations General Assembly itself spoke volumes. But what it did show was that businesses are understanding this is a common framework, a common platform that speaks to wherever you do business. So whether you're doing business in Kinshasa or Kansas City or Mumbai or here in Paris, these goals are applicable, particularly for multinationals. It enables them to reach out to talk this common language because they're applicable to every community. So, I think that is one way that the private sector can show that we are behind and heavily invested in the success of the planet and mobilizing, I will also say, our human capital for good.
Thank you, Sue. So it's human capital connectivity, making sure there's a purpose-driven mission that is focused on humanity. Diana, I'm going to turn to you. The rise of artificial intelligence has caused many of our organizations and networks to regress in our own human aspects of business. I think most people will agree. Is there a balance between emerging technology and still maintaining the personal and human experiences in the workplace and within our own networks? And as you think about that, how is this next generation of tech leaders being groomed to adjust, stay nimble, which I stole directly from you, and adapt in the face of new technologies that call for humans to actually be more accountable in our society?
Right, thank you very much. So, big picture, when we're talking leadership, I think we're talking about driving in our businesses the maximum level of entrepreneurial spirit and leading self-directed teams. Now, let me maybe go a little bit more into the specifics, if I may. One piece is shifting from a finger-pointing type of culture towards fail cheap and quickly. And this was already discussed on one of the panels earlier today. Another piece is shifting from hierarchical, from a leadership standpoint, to project-based. Another way to illustrate the same theme, from hierarchical to influencing and impacting without real authority. In terms of innovation, from incremental innovation to disruptive innovation. Another attribute, from predictability to a good tolerance level to ambiguity. From recruiting where the work is to allocating the work where the talent is. from well-structured teams to what is actually a fairly messy, convoluted environment. And maybe finally from we do it all ourselves to co-creating, co-developing, and partnering.
Artificial intelligence is something that we're going to continue to hear more and more about. But Alexis, I'll just say to you, you've made your entire career dedicated to being connected to a workforce, to a human workforce. And successful businesses, as I said up earlier, are really often built on strong relationships with people, be they customers, employees, communities, suppliers, or others, people. Yet our corporate interactions, as Diane has laid out so eloquently, are not always involving the human touch anymore. And it does not have compassion or empathy and communication that builds strong relationships. So how can we keep workers, human workers, connected to their humanity in that rapidly changing business environment that Diane laid out for us?
Thank you, Star, for the question and for your leadership on this panel. You know, whenever I hear the word connected for workers, I always think of how do we keep workers engaged in this rapidly changing, technologically driven environment. And the reality is, I think, first of all, we have to remember what the word connection or engagement means. It means to be mutually committed. And so how do we foster anew what those mutual commitments look like? And so as I listened to Anne and as she talked about looking at it more for the long term and for the investment in our people, in our resources, we can't be so mesmerized by technology, as much as I admire the work and what it's doing, that we forget that the core of whatever we do is our people. And so how do we ensure that our people are front and center as we go forward? I think there are three things, Sarah, that are very important in this regard. First, I would say that you have to recognize today that we are looking at the world of work and workers through two very different sets of lenses. The first set of lenses are for those workers who are embracing the new technology, who are really into all of the disruption, and it's a good thing as we shed old ways of thinking, as we shed old behaviors. But the reality is 68% of the global workforce today is disconnected. Only 15% feel engaged. And so I think that for that other group of workers where there's anxiety and feelings of insecurity and confusion around all of this destabilization, that two things ought to happen. One, we have to take those resources and be much more intentional about investing in what it really means to engage workers today. And when you talk about what it really means to engage workers today, we use data analytics more for our customers, quite frankly, than we do for our own workers. We don't really know what they're thinking, you know? And the reality is we've got to do a much better job of holding leaders and managers accountable for making sure that we are much more intentional about investing in engagement processes, in setting up the right structures. It doesn't just automatically happen. And I think we've got to do more to tie the outcomes to compensation so that it's meaningful and it's real. The second thing that I think is that we have to foster more transparent conversations with workers today. You know, the old way of thinking about work is that we brought our minds and bodies to work and we focused on just that, our work environment. But today, we have to have the conversations that allow our workers to bring their whole bodies, their whole minds, and their whole worlds with them. Today, because of the impact of social media, so much is going on in the world, whether it is here in the UK, you know, the fate of the European Union, Brexit in the United States, you know, you had the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, there's just so much that we are thinking about when we come to work. So how do we foster environments that allow those transparent conversations to occur so that people in part can begin to unburden their minds at work? We've done a fabulous job with workplaces. I mean, you've got stand-up offices now, communal environments. Sometimes you don't even have to show up anymore. It's not even about flex time. You know, bowling alleys in the middle of workspaces and gyms in the middle of workspaces.
Peanut butter machine.
Peanut butter machines. You like peanut butter?
That's my favorite, girl. I love a peanut butter machine in the cafeteria.
But, you know, I wish I had worked when we had the bowling alleys. But anyway, the reality is we've got to do a whole lot more to free our workers up to bring their whole worlds and persons. And for women, this is a special challenge. Because for us, we don't think we can do that. I mean, we believe it impacts our careers if we bring our whole selves. And, you know, we can't talk about the kids and the caretaker responsibilities and all of the things that we are juggling. Many of us still have the superwoman syndrome. And so we wear the mask. So we've got to be our own disruptors and take off our own masks, I believe, in this new environment.
100%. Bravo to the ladies. To connect what Alexis said to Anne, and this is that innate connectivity that you were speaking about.
Yeah, and I actually, there was a couple of things that really struck me from both Alexis and actually what Diane was saying earlier about the commitment and the connectivity. What I was trying to feel towards is around how you create a workforce that can adapt to the way that you need it to, which is absolutely sort of playing into that theme. We have to teach our workers to have the skills to adapt to this environment. So, you know, what do I mean by that? Well, in a way, we sometimes suffer with our workforce from an excess of specialization. That's a simple point. So if you grow up being a coal miner and all you've ever done is be a coal miner, if the pit then closes and there's nothing else obvious for you to do, what else do you know? You don't know anything else. Now, we don't typically employ coal miners, but we do employ a lot of people directly or outsourced that are highly specialized. And when we no longer need that specialization, we sort of put them to one side and we get another set of specialists in. And we have to change the way we think about that because that is wasteful of enormous amounts of human capital. So I think there is unquestionably something in this about not just having an individual contract between employer and employee, but having a broader contract, not just on an individual level, but on a collective level that says we value you in the collective. We want you to learn skills and adapt, and we need to teach ourselves how we have to use that to best effect. And that does mean changing hierarchies in the way that we've all grown up thinking about lovely structure charts and all the stuff that you were saying. So I think there is something really in this, tying those pieces together that we can take away from. I certainly take away from that as thinking about what I'll do in the business going back. It sparked some real ideas for me, actually.
And Diane, this goes to your whole concept of staying nimble, being able to adapt, to adjust, to bob and weave with whatever's being thrown at you.
Indeed. I mean, and somehow, I think what we're probably talking about is that now the challenge is to take our people with us on the journey and engage with them in a continuing learning process. And it's not about learning particular skills more than learning to learn and keep learning.
And also, Sue, to make what is important to you a part of your work environment, which is the second part of what Alexis talked about.
Yeah, I think to your point about sense of purpose, I think it's so key now in the workforce. People want to be connected with, whether they're making widgets or whether they're in executive roles or junior roles, they want to feel that they're more than just coming to work to do a job, but be part of the bigger purpose of an organization. And I think it drives engagement, it drives retention, it drives loyalty to organizations. And I think those that are really able to help individuals see their purpose, and I've got many examples, happy to share one later, but I think it does come down to a purpose-driven organization and employees seeing themselves in that role.
You actually have given me the perfect segue, because I want us to speak in the same language. And when we first met to discuss this topic, Alexis brought that up. Getting a real definition of humanity starts the conversation off. So we talked about making businesses more human. What is it to be human? What is the definition of our humanity? And I'll let you start.
I always use a terrific quote that is attributed to Maya Angelou, the amazing civil rights activist and American poet, who said, people will forget what you did, people will forget what you said, people will never forget how you made them feel. And to me, that's the very essence of leadership. It's essence of sort of the type of work culture that you want. It's the essence of really creating a sort of human environment, because it's not about what you're telling them to do. It's about connecting them to that broader purpose, but enabling them to feel inspired, to feel empowered, to feel energized, to feel incredibly proud to be part of the organization. So it's important as leaders, as young leaders, as experienced leaders, that it's easy, I think, for all of us. We get so caught up in the busy work that we're caught up with every day. Technology adds to that, I think, with the, we've always, I'm sure, got many emails sitting in your inbox through the evening and in the morning before you even arrive at the office. So it's easy to get distracted, but pivoting when you're interacting with your employees, with your people, and remembering about that sort of human aspect is key. It's not about being nice. It's not about. It's about being effective as a leader, but it's about creating the right environment and really valuing your people for the contributions they make, for celebrating their successes, and providing them with the tools and resources that they need to be effective in their roles.
Diane, what is the definition of more human? Another way, what are the elements that make up the human culture, if you will?
Probably simply a mix of brain and heart.
That's pretty simple, and it's how people always ask me, Star, what do we need to do to stay fit? Eat less and move more. Pretty simple. That's really what it comes down to. You can keep all that other stuff, right? Brain and heart. And I'll turn to you. I'm looking for that definition so that we speak the same language. Humanity, define it for us.
That's a pretty tough question, because I'm an engineer and I work in financial services, and the words and the kind of softer side of life don't necessarily come instantly to me. So I'm not sure I can define what humanity is. But what I can say is the thing that separates humans from non-humans is around culture. And one of the things that I've tried to do in the business, and has been a remarkable journey to go on over the last, I've been in the role for about 16 months, is thinking of culture in terms of the behaviors you expect. So in terms of being completely explicit, first of all, about purpose, secondly, about the principles that stand behind that purpose, and then thirdly, about what you want people to do at every level of the organization. And we've made it dead simple. I'm not a complicated person. We talk about 5 behaviors that we want them to see them exhibit. We want them to create. We want them to adapt. We want them to grow. We want them to enable. And that attaches to all sorts of different of the businesses. And overarching all of that is we want them to show that they care. Care for their colleagues, care for their customer, care about the environment they're working in and the contribution to do that. And it's been really interesting as a journey to go through this. We call this our care cage. That's because you've got to have it in an acronym. But in just being explicit, why we're there, why we're doing what we're doing, how are we doing it, and how do we want you to play a part in that, has been a great opener. And I think we don't spend enough time with our staff, with our employees, saying, actually, you can shape that culture. These are what we want you to do, and you then can play a part in creating the sort of business that you want it to be. And for our industry, more than most, this is desperately important because we are under regulatory pressure, and we have to evidence that our culture is appropriate to the outcomes that the regulator expects us to deliver for our customers. There aren't very many industries that is true in. So if you want to be explicit about evidencing, you've got to know what it is that you're asking people to do. So it's been a fascinating exercise to go through, and I have been really surprised by how constructively that has been engaged with and welcomed by everybody at every level in the business. It's really important to be explicit.
It seems that having an explicit mission-driven goal that we all can rally around is indeed inspiring and can make for that connectivity that we're all looking for. Alexis, define human so that we speak from the same language.
Well, as I was listening to Ann, I love the care cage. But as you talk about being explicit, I think what we have to do more of is to say, okay, so what does that look like? The behaviors are important, but I think you need to give people practical action steps to practice being human today. And so when I think about practical action steps, I think of things like, first of all, we need more transparent conversations with workers, but you know what? We need CEOs and leaders to have more transparent conversations about the values of the company on social issues. It used to be that we only spoke on things that impacted our bottom line. But today, especially millennials, they want to really know what you stand for and what are your real values. And so I think our leaders have to speak more to those values and what it looks like for them and be visible. And then as a part of being visible, I think you have to be repetitive. You know, sending out, you know, whatever, emails or communiques or what we do 2 or 3 times a year, especially in this era of diversity. It's not enough. You've got to be consistent about it. It's got to be ongoing. So I think repetition in the midst of all the change is so important. I also believe that more companies, more business leaders need a common language today to define what are some of the common principles that we can all rally behind. You know, climate change is a great example of that. And I'm not going to get into a political debate on what happened in our country, but I will say the fact that so many business leaders are embracing those principles, we used to have much more of that. We don't. And then the other thing, when I think about Diane's world and what's happening with the whole era of disruptive technology, you know what? We've got to create cultures today that make it okay for people to fail. We don't do that very well. But this new generation of workers, they want to experiment. These millennials want to experiment to get to the right answers, to get to new outcomes. And sometimes to do that, you're going to fail in the process. And we've got to be more accepting of those kinds of behaviors as well.
There's no question, absolutely. And, you know, today's setback can be the setup for the next success.
There you go. That's what I'm talking about.
You never know, okay? So we have very little time left, which I'm sad about because I want to talk a little bit more about value-driven workforce and emphasizing the connectivity that comes from a common mission. But in this little bit of time that I have left, I think probably one question I still have to ask all of you, since we are here at the Women's Forum and we're supposed to be disrupting everything. You all are just the women, I think, that can do it. So I put to you the final question of How do you plan to take all of the human qualities you say businesses need, and we say the workforce already has in them and requires of a business? How do you plan to lead in that disruptive world while remembering to be human yourself? And I'll put it to you, Anne.
Okay, so I think there is this whole theme that we've been talking about, not being afraid to fail, absolutely has to be out there. Now, I will say to the team, I don't mind fast fail, but fast success is even better. So don't lose sight of that in all of this. You know, fast fail, good. Fast success, great. So there's a little bit about not losing that desire and that willingness to fail occasionally. I think that's really important. Then there's 3 other things which I think you need to hold in yourself, because we talked about culture. Alexis's point is absolutely right. People have to see that you are acting what you are telling. So all our care cage stuff is great, but I have explicit behaviors of examples in people's actual jobs that they have to evidence in their jobs, and I think you really need to do that. But I need to do that too. I'm often asked what makes a good fund manager. I actually think it's exactly the same thing as makes a good business leader. In addition to that, not being afraid to fail from time to time, you clearly need integrity to your purpose. You clearly need curiosity. The moment that you stop being curious about anything that's going on out there, you are dead. You need that curiosity. And you need tenacity. You've got to be willing to do the hard yards. So that's what I think it comes down to fundamentally.
Ready to lead. Okay, Sue, how do you plan to lead in this disruptive world and keep your humanity?
I think it comes down to having passion in your belly for what you've focused in on. I'm fortunate that having spent my entire career in the private sector and now in the NGO world, just taking on an opportunity to really disrupt the focus on human capital investments and how employees can really share skills, knowledge, and experience to make an impact in their local communities around the world. So we are trying to influence companies to change a paradigm on how they view their human capital investments and the potential good that can be done there and the linkage to purpose. But I think it comes back to really believing what you're trying to drive to have that human touch of really believing in what you're trying to advance forward.
If you don't believe it, nobody else is, right? Alexis, how do you plan to continue to lead in this disruptive world?
Well, I have to say, Star, for me, it's just the new normal. And I say that as an African-American woman. I say that because that has been my history. I've always been about disruption, whether it was getting the first women of color into managerial and professional jobs in companies like General Motors, Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines, or getting expelled from school when I was 15 because I dared confront the Archbishop of why we had segregated schools in our Catholic diocese. So for me, when I think about, okay, so what do you dare to do and lead differently? It's not so much for me being different. It's much more now about being conscious of my conscious self and my walk. I've always been about breaking barriers. For me, it's always been about how do I empower more women, more people of color, for those who have been alienated and left behind. And so I want to not be overwhelmed by the technology, by the disruption. I want to keep my focus. I want to get more women into the boardrooms. I want to get more women who are of like minds in the boardroom. It's not just about more women. I want to make sure that I get more women into positions of power and influence. And how can I continue to use my skills and my connections to make sure that that continues to happen? And so for me, it's about staying focused. and not getting confused or overwhelmed or distracted by all of the change that is taking place. Today it's technology. Before it was machines. But you know what? The struggle to get us at the table, that hasn't changed. So
100%. I have to tell you guys, point of personal privilege, Alexis has been a mentor of mine for 20 years, and she doesn't just talk the talk, she actually walks the walk. And whenever I think of the instruction that you need to lean in, I think of you, because you don't need to lean in. You already lean in so far, you are darn near perpendicular. You are the lean in queen when it comes to disrupting, no question about it. And I've learned to I have this new friend, Diane, who just cuts to the chase. And I can't wait to hear how you plan to lead in this disruptive world.
Why is it that anyone would follow me? Do I deserve it? No, only to the extent that I demonstrate a strong set of values and good, robust judgment. Other than that, my leadership is not legitimate, and then it becomes abusive. So somehow, I'm thinking of leadership going forward a little bit like acting as a conductor. And today, I would like to introduce to you a new way to conduct, somehow illustrating the alliance between technology and humanity. That's the topic of our panel. Please meet this new guy here. Would you please start the video?
Somebody's out of a job. That was really great. Diane, thank you so much, and thank you to our panel. You all were wonderful, 100%. Let's give them a round of applause, please, if you don't mind. Just before we go, I feel compelled to say that my leadership in this disruptive world is going to be through diversity and inclusion and in corporate responsibility. I'm so proud to have led a delegation from China in the first of our East Meets West collaboration with the International Association of Women, and to make sure that people understand that diversity and inclusion is not something that just makes you feel good, it's a business imperative. So thank you all very much for joining us, and remain human. Thank you again.